Julian, when this campaign is rolled out to privatize schools and follow the portfolio model, it often is accompanied by lots of charts and graphs and studies and all sorts of really smart-sounding language that says this really works. What happened in New Orleans really works, and it'll work for you too. Now, you are one of the best people I know at addressing that issue, and so I'm wondering if that's what you came prepared today to talk to us about.
I think maybe the 8 stats courses I took at Stanford prepared me to answer that question. So let's go for it. But first, I want to first thank the native people, the Choctaw, the Natchez, the Tunica, for allowing us to be here on their land. I also want to say I'm very sensitive to the fact that, New Orleans is a place of colonization, whether it was the French or later the Americans and other groups. So I'm very sensitive when I talk about this work that I do it in collaboration with people who are from New Orleans. When I wrote a policy brief about this some years ago, I drew upon their work. And it's a real tribute, I think, to the Progressive magazine, that the people that are on the stage are people of color, primarily from this community. So I much appreciate that. So just moving forward here, I have a couple of slides, so I can talk. I want to talk a little bit from them. As soon as I can get this to project, just a moment. Okay, great. So tweet at me. This is Netroots, right? So at Professor JVH. When they say when you're public speaking, you want your audience to come away with a certain feeling. So the feeling that I want you to come away with from this talk is, I want to learn more, right? Because the conversations about charter school and more broadly about school choice as it relates to research is like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole. There's a lot of information out there, and you have to really do your homework to understand sort of the broad canvas of what's out there in terms of research. So, as we know, Betsy DeVos and Donald Trump are big fans of school choice. Donald Trump promised to spend $20 billion. In fact, a researcher here in New Orleans just received a $10 million grant from Betsy DeVos to study charter schools. So you're going to be hearing a lot more. Now, I think the broader conversation that we're having right now about school reform, it's important to give context. The education reformers are interested in top-down approaches that are about private control and privatization. That is the approach here in New Orleans. That's the approach in Detroit. That's been the approach in Oakland. In many, many other places, it's about top-down reform and about privatization and private control. And here's a couple of examples of that. These are actual pictures from schools. I went on a tour with Karen on her birthday 2 years ago. And these are some of the pictures of the schools in New Orleans that have been abandoned because of the reform that's happened here. So what is the common denominator of these reforms? Is it social justice and civil rights? It's actually about top-down private control and privatization and control of the resources of education. These ideas pre-existed, these retrograded ideas onto them about civil rights and social justice. Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys came up with these ideas of markets and school choice, and then later proponents of school choice attached civil rights narratives to them. One of my other roles, in addition to serving as a professor at Cal State, is I'm the education chair for the California NAACP. So I think very deeply about how these issues are related to civil rights. So now we're going to go to grad school. Just in case you're thinking about your master's or your PhD, I'm going to talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty, the research. What we know from the research and what we're seeing here in New Orleans and elsewhere is that charters are even more segregated than are already segregated traditional public schools. A lot of times folks in the charter school sector will say, well, the traditional public schools, they're segregated too. What's really, I think, despairing about charter schools is they take a lot of the issues that we already have in our traditional public schools, whether it be no excuses discipline, whether it be segregation, and they actually make them worse. And so what you see here is looking at the Common Core data from NCES, National Center for Educational Statistics. This is a brand new study. You folks here are actually the first people to see this work because it's currently under peer review, but don't tell anybody. And you watching on live stream, don't tell anybody because it's currently under peer review. So nationally, a higher percent of charter school students attend more intensely segregated school. That's the national data. Charter schools are more doubly segregated, which means they're segregated by race and by class, which you see here in New Orleans. Charter schools are more likely to be segregated even when controlling for local demographics. A lot of charter school people will say, well, charter schools are segregated because they sit in segregated neighborhoods. Well, even when you control for that, you find that charters are 2 to 3% more segregated. So throw that argument out the window for them. A majority of states have at least half of blacks and a third of Latinos in intensely segregated charter schools. Those are schools that are more than 90% Latino or black. At the city level, we also find the same results. So we actually did a special issue on this, the Journal of Transformative Leadership and Policy Studies. I'm giving you lots of homework today. Remember, down the rabbit hole. So accreditation and authorizing, there's a lot of conversations about who should be authorizing charters. Should it only be local, or should the state be able to do that? Plessy versus Ferguson, which we know is separate and unequal. We have an interesting piece on that. What does the curriculum look like? Is segregation driven by the fact that knowledge is also being segregated between white charters and charters that serve primarily Latino and black students? And also the implications, the California NAACP president wrote a piece about the implications for civil rights. So check that out. We also find, as Karen talked about, that charters are less likely to serve special education students and other students that have special needs. When you look at it spatially, when you look at it statewide, nationally, that's what the research has been saying for quite some time. And then specifically results, and maybe there might be someone in here that read Doug Harris's study in the last couple of weeks. We can talk about that if you've done that. If you don't, the academics are working to review this study, peer review it. But here's the data in a piece that I wrote. Should Louisiana and the Recovery School District receive accolades for being last and nearly last in almost every academic outcome out there? The RSD graduation rate was last in the state of Louisiana. Only 5.5% of the Recovery School District students who took AP courses scored high enough to get credit. The state-run RSD is 66 in the state of Louisiana and the ACT. So I want to really quickly talk about some alternatives. I'll make it quick, which is that there are community-based ways that we do this. For everything that's about top-down and private control, we have a community-based alternative that's focused on African Americans, on Latinos, on students, so that they're the ones that are empowered by education reforms, not outsiders like me. So does this work? In California, we have something called community-based accountability. It's raised our graduation rates, and it's closed the achievement gaps across the state. A lot of people don't know that California has an $8 billion surplus, $8 billion, and we're investing that money in education right now. So finally, W.E.D., this is not a new debate, actually. W.E.D. Du Bois wrote a piece about does the Negro need separate schools in 1935. So we're actually having the same conversation about charter schools, about should we have separate segregated schools. And so what I did was I used a replacement method that I learned in a summer course taught at Stanford to replace the nouns with the current conversation. I'll read that, and that'll be my closing. This is W.B. Du Bois, and I've replaced some of the language. It means this and nothing more. To sum this, theoretically, the African American needs neither segregated charter schools nor mixed neighborhood schools. What he needs is education. What he must remember is that there is no magic in either mixed neighborhood public schools or in segregated charter schools. A mixed neighborhood public school with poor, unsympathetic teachers with hostile public opinion and no teaching of truth concerning black folk is bad. A segregated charter school with ignorant placeholders, inadequate equipment, poor salaries, and wretched housing is equally bad. Other things being equal, the mixed neighborhood public school is the broader, more natural basis for the education of all youth. It gives wider contacts, inspires greater confidence, and suppresses the inferiority complex. But other things are seldom equal, and in that case, sympathy, knowledge, and truth outweigh all that the mixed neighborhood school can offer. So I think I'll end there.